The shogun saw the power of this new industrialized navy showing up in Edo Bay, and the American and European demands to open up. And in 1854, one of the truly misnamed treaties in history, showing how spin and propaganda is a pervasive fact throughout history, a treaty of amity and friendship at gunpoint was signed by the shogunate and the American government. And similar treaties of amity and friendship at gunpoint or will blow your capital up were signed with the British Empire and one by one with the other European powers. Japan was in trouble, and Japan had to give absolute massive concessions to the demands of these industrial imperialist powers showing up in Japan. Well, we know what happened in China. In China, the arrival of the European imperial powers led to a downward spiral in Japan. Lost wars, internal insurrection, humiliation, and China was not able to respond effectively to this challenge. Japan was different. Perhaps its high social capital, perhaps the fact that in the 19th century, already before Commodore Perry showed up, this was one of the most literate places on the planet, with literacy rates for men estimated at around 40% in the middle of the 19th century. Absolutely extraordinary. This was a highly literate, highly sophisticated, but pre-industrial society. And with all that social capital, Japan responded really as a nation in what is, for me as an economist watching economic policy and economic reform, something absolutely astounding, almost never seen so effectively in history. What happened is this: these unequal treaties were pushed down the shogunate's throat. They gave all sorts of rights to the foreigners. They said that Japan could not impose duties or tariffs on the goods of the European powers and the United States. And the shogun was exposed as completely incapable of responding. And the Japanese thinkers and leaders of the time, some of the leading noble houses, the daimyos, said, we must do something or Japan is going to fall asunder, it's going to lose its sovereignty, it's going to face disaster. And so in 1868, there was a political revolution. The political revolution known as the Meiji Restoration. It's given that name, restoration, because it was the forced end of the Tokugawa shogunate in the name of the emperor, Emperor Meiji, who was notionally brought back to power, but in fact, this was a political revolution to create a new industrial society that could respond to the Western challenge. And within 10 years of 1868, one stunning reform after another was brought to bear almost entirely peacefully, other than one brief rebellion in 1877, the Satsuma Rebellion. Otherwise, this was a peaceful, dramatic revolution. Stunning because it was so successful. And one part that I especially love about it, that I think is a kind of miracle, in 1871, several of the ministers of the new post-shogunate government of Japan went on a tour. Now, if it were today, maybe they'd get on Zoom, but there was no Zoom then. They had to go see for themselves what was happening in Europe, what was happening in the United States. What can we learn from what those industrializing countries are doing? And so they went on a mission. The mission is called the Iwakura mission because the leader, Iwakura, brought several ministers and many experts, around 50 experts traveling on this mission, arriving in San Francisco Bay, touring the United States, sailing to Britain, sailing to the continent, visiting France, Belgium, Denmark, Germany, and on, seeing what is happening in Europe, and most remarkably, what can we learn for what Japan should do. And the result was book after book of remarkable notes. Here is how public education is organized. Here is how higher education is organized. Here is how the army is organized. Here is how industry is organized. Here's what's happening in the steel mills. Here's what's happening in the textile mills. And they came back in 1873, and the Iwakura mission was given the power to implement the best practices that they had seen in the leading countries. What ensued is a remarkable story from an economic point of view, because from 1870 to 1900, Japan joined the ranks of the industrial nations. Japan became the only country in Asia to become an industrial power. Japan realized that the strategy must be effective government, higher education, mass education, and technology, which is why the Miracon is here in Japan, because this idea that technology must be at the core of a successful society was deeply embedded already in the findings and the lessons taken from the Iwakura mission. Japan remarkably invited in foreign experts across all the sectors, the steel mills, the shipbuilding, the textile mills, and built industry to the new standards of the latest technologies of the industrial age. And then it thanked the foreign advisors and sent them home. They became the new leading Japanese conglomerates like Sumitomo and Mitsubishi, known at the time as the Zaibatsu, giant industrial and commercial conglomerates that became leading companies in the whole world. And in economic terms, we see industrial and technological-led growth. During the period from 1820 to 1870, Japan wasn't entirely stagnant, but the economic growth was tiny. And then it really takes off. Statistically, from less than 0.5% per year during the 1820 to 1870 period, and then well above 2% per year during the period from 1870 to 1900, meaning that the output of the economy doubled during that 30-year period. Now, that's the economic side. There is a sad side, which is the geopolitical side. This was the age of imperialism. This was the age in which the early industrializers went to war to conquer or rule or colonize the pre-industrial societies. And Japan had the idea of joining the Western club of industrial powers. What happened economically from 1870 to 1900 was absolutely remarkable. An industrial and technological takeoff of Japan, making Japan the first industrialized country of Asia. What happened politically was not so good. at least in one very important sense. This was the age of imperialist-led war. This was the age in which the imperial powers of Europe were conquering, colonizing, plundering the pre-industrial world. And Japan aspired to join the club. So as Japan became industrially powerful, it aimed to become militarily powerful, not only to protect itself from the Western powers, but also to join the Western powers in the imperialist age. And Japan pursued a militaristic strategy at the end of the 19th century, going to war first with China in 1894-95, and taking a first major colony, Taiwan, and then going to war 10 years later with Russia, which had its big imperial presence in the northeast of Asia, and defeating Russia. And that was a stunning event in the imagination of the political world, because now an Eastern country had defeated a Western country. That was something that at the time was seen to be impossible, given the arrogance of the Western world. But Japan won the Russo-Japanese War, and from then Japan gained another colony that would be a colony for several decades, and that was Korea. First informal control over Korea in 1905, and then Korea became a formal, and then Korea became a formal colony of Japan in 1910. And we know that much more ensued, because in the 1920s and 30s, the war party in Japan rose to dominance and initiated more wars of conquest in East Asia, including the war with China in the 1930s. Now, Japan, of course, was on the losing end of the Second World War. Japan was decisively defeated at the end of the war, and suffered the horrific and tragic outcome of having the first two atomic bombs used by the United States against Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so at the end of World War II, Japan was destroyed and crushed and had suffered massively. And indeed, the economic output of Japan, of course, had completely collapsed along with the military defeat. A second economic miracle then occurred, and this time in the context of peace and in the context of a society that renounced militarism after World War II. And this second remarkable surge of economic growth, and by second I mean following the Meiji Restoration after 1868, now Japan's recovery after World War II, and then its surge in technology-led growth, is a second remarkable episode of Japan's vision of economic development. First, Japan recovered through extraordinarily hard work from the devastation of World War II, so that by the mid-1950s, the pre-war economy was roughly back to where it was. But what happened again was Japan put its faith in science and technology as the key to prosperity and to economic development. And we know it because Japanese high-tech products, especially what we know, the microelectronics, Sony and others, became household names around the world. Sony set up shop, Akio Morita set up shop immediately after the end of the Second World War, an electronic shop, but then took on the wonderful creativity of using the newly invented transistor, invented only in 1947, and starting to put it into transistor radios by the 1950s and into other microelectronics products that filled the households of the affluent countries around the world by the 1960s. So technologically led economic growth. And Japan invested remarkably in education, in science and technology, in research and development. And in the 1960s, Japan put down a marker which inspired the rest of East Asia and still inspires now all developing countries that seek prosperity. The Prime Minister at the beginning of the 1960s, Prime Minister Ikeda, said this will be a decade in which we will double our income. That is a remarkably bold goal for a country to double its output within 10 years. But Prime Minister Ikeda famously made that pledge. But even more famously and remarkably, the pledge was fulfilled in 7 years, not 10 years. Because in the 1960s, Japan grew at 10% per year. And remembering the rule of 70, dividing 70 by 10, the growth rate, we know that the economy would double in 70 over 10 or 7 years. So by 1967, the Japanese economy had doubled from the start of the 1960s. And it would continue to grow rapidly because Japan continued in the direction of technology-led growth. And already by the 1980s, Japan was pioneering new areas of the digital age, and especially I see that my Android friend Alter has come back to life. Nice to be with you. Thank you very much. Japan already began to develop androids, to develop robots. I had the privilege and amazement and pleasure of visiting the Toyota automobile manufacturer in one of their great manufacturing sites in the 1990s. And there was hardly a worker in sight as we walked through this remarkable factory because it was all robots along the assembly line assembling the automobiles. And each automobile that was coming along the line was different from the previous one. It wasn't just knocking out the same thing because the robots had many different flexible commands. So if it was a 4-seater, they would do it one way. If it was a 2-seater coming, they would do it another way. If it was a convertible coming on the line, the robots would know how to put together that particular model. And as the robots were working, their parts needed to be replenished, and there were little robots going along the factory floor carrying the parts from one bin to another bin to replenish the parts that these robots were inserting along the assembly line. So this was already 30 years ago. And Japan became the place where robots were really developed massively for industrial purposes first. Now, of course, this is spreading around the world. And Japan continued wave after wave to be part of our 7th age of globalization, not just part of it, but a core leader of it. Japan, of course, is the home to some of the most important, largest and significant semiconductor companies in the whole world. And Japan continues to do what we see throughout the Mirai-kan, throughout this house of the future, to be at the cutting edge of so many areas of technology because Japan discovered or knew, but proved, I think is the right verb, that technology-led development based on excellence of education, based on investments in research and development, and based on a belief, the optimism that technology can provide new solutions for human well-being, developed a kind of economic strategy that has proven to be extremely powerful and is applied in many, many other parts of the world. I first came to Japan myself as a young practicing economist in the early 1980s and heard about this approach then, and over the succeeding 4 decades have watched it in play and watched its application in China or in Korea or in Singapore or in more and more countries around the world, and have found it to be an extremely powerful, incisive, and deeply productive approach to economic development. Now, Japan, like the rest of the world, faces many new challenges in which new technologies will be needed. This Mirakan is devoted to environmental sustainability. It's devoted to improved lifestyles for an aging population or for people facing particular disabilities that can be helped through technologies. It's looking also at the new frontiers of knowledge, whether in space or in the subatomic world. So this really is a home of the future. Japan is a country that has aimed to help build a better future through technology, and Japan now as a country that has displayed profound social capital, the capacity to react as a society to challenges, is once again taking up the challenges of sustainable development in the 21st century, and I'm confident that the whole world will benefit by Japan's commitment to developing new approaches and new technologies to address the challenges of sustainable development in our digital age. Well, this probably could have gone on for a very long time were it not for a knock on the door in 1853, and that was a quite violent and threatening knock on the door. It was the U.S. Navy. It was the Commodore Matthew Perry, who came in the name of the United States government to demand that Japan open up. And it was a typical act of imperial arrogance that was repeated throughout Asia during the 18th and 19th centuries. It was, we will be your friends at gunpoint, and we will sign, as was done in 1854, a treaty of amity and friendship, or we will blow you up, was the message from the United States. And Japan and the shogun were forced to make unilateral concessions to far more powerful industrial navies of the United States and the European powers. This is the side effect of peace. Japan was not a fighting nation at that point. It had had hundreds of years of internal peace and had thrived on the basis of that internal peace, but now it was confronted by highly militarized powers coming from newly industrializing Europe and the United States. And we know that this is the moment where we see a divergence of China's path and Japan's path. In China, the arrival of the Europeans led to military defeats and to internal disarray to a massive civil war in the 1850s and the 1860s, the Taiping Rebellion, in which it's estimated that 10 or 20 million people died, perhaps the biggest civil war in history in terms of deaths. Whereas in Japan, what happened here in 1868 was that powerful magnates of other Hans, that is, daimyos of other Hans, essentially told the Tokugawa shogun, the time is up, you're finished. And there was a brief skirmish, and the long reign of the Tokugawa shogunate from 1603 to 1868 was brought to a dramatic, decisive, rapid end. And from that point, Japan aspired to become an industrial nation so that it could fend off the threats from outside, so that it could take advantage of the new technologies, first and foremost to become militarily strong, but second to develop a civilian economy that was supported by the new industrial technologies. Japan undertook at a societal level, with, again, a history of coherence, peace, and strategy, a set of changes of the social and the political and the economic and the technological order in a short period of time, which propelled Japan to become one of the most powerful, richest, newly industrializing economies of the world. The samurai class was ended in a short period of time, from 1868 to 1877, and the warrior class was disbanded almost without a shot being fired. There was one short rebellion in 1877, but it was quickly put down, and the samurai class went into history and was ended. Indeed, the whole strong class structure of a military ruler and a samurai class beneath, and a peasant population tied to the particular Hans, all of that erased within a short period of time. What took hundreds of years in Europe took 1 decade in Japan. And the fact that Japan consciously, brilliantly looked out to the world and asked the question, what's the best way to organize a modern army? What is the best way to create higher education? What is the best way to organize a national constitution that is based on modern needs rather than on a military rule? What is the best way to organize a central bank? Well, the Iwakura mission, sent out by the new civilian government after 1868, took scrupulous notes all over Europe and the United States and came back with answers that were adapted in Japan, so that within a decade, and really we could say within a generation, because the process of change continued into the 1890s, Japan became a modern state. This place became the residence of the emperor, the Meiji emperor, in whose name the revolution of 1868 was made. That's why 1868 is not known as the toppling of the Tokugawa shogunate, but as the restoration of Meiji, the Meiji Restoration. And so it was in the name of the emperor that this dramatic political change, changing the society that had developed over 700 years quickly, so that Japan could become a modern industrial state. Japan also became a modern imperial state by the end of the 1890s, because that seemed to be the thing to do. That's what the Western imperial powers were. They were powerful, they were rich, they were industrial, and they were conquering. And Japan aspired to be part of that club of the leading nations of the world, to say to Europe and the US, you cannot impose unequal treaties on us. We are part of your club. And in two major wars, first with China in 1894-95, and then with Russia in 1904-1905, Japan took on colonies, Taiwan and Korea, and it was to hold those colonies until the end of World War II. Today, we are, thank goodness, in a remarkable nation that continues to excel in the world in social capital. A nation that has an incredible culture that is distinctive, in many ways perhaps the fruits of relative isolation built up over centuries, but a culture also built up of internal peace over centuries, so that aside from the imperial era of Japan from the 1890s to 1945, this has been a country that over the span of a millennium has been a country remarkably at peace. And it is a country that enshrined that anti-militarist idea following the defeat in World War II in Japan's constitution, in Article 9 of Japan's constitution, to reject the path of militarism that Japan had temporarily taken to join the club of the European and US imperial powers. So today, Japan is a country distinctive for its internal peace, one of the very lowest homicide rates and rates of violent crime in the entire world. It's almost unimaginable in Japan. It occurs sometimes tragically, but always tragic. It occurs tragically, but at such low levels that Japan stands out as this high social capital, internally peaceful society. And that internal peace and Japan's culture have also delivered for Japan the very highest life expectancy in the world today. And that, to my mind, is the single best indicator of social success, the capacity of longevity, of peaceful existence within society. So today, at a peaceful Japan and with the imperial residents to my back, we can celebrate that history and take note of this remarkable phase of Japan's history, and a remarkable phase represented by the conversion of a castle, Edo Castle, into the imperial residence of today's Emperor and Empress of Japan.